We're going to talk about the zones of the ocean. This is an ocean review guide. There are 3 zones of the ocean: the sunlight, the twilight, and the midnight. The sunlight is what it sounds like. It is the sunniest. Because it has the most amount of sun, it is also the warmest. There's the least amount of pressure there because you don't have anything else sitting on top of that layer. And finally, there's the most amount of life that lives there because there's the most amount of sun. So think about any kind of plants that live in the ocean. They have to live in the sunlight zone because they need sun in order to live. There's also the least amount of salt in the sunlight zone because salt sinks. So it's going to be the saltiest at the bottom. Below the sunlight zone is the twilight zone. That has less sun, so there's some sun still, but not a whole lot. It has medium temperature, medium pressure, medium salinity or saltiness. There's less life. It's easier to live in the sunlight zone than it is to live in the twilight zone. There's even less life as you go deeper into the midnight zone. The midnight zone has no sun. It is the coldest. It has the most pressure. It is also the saltiest. So there are less animals that live down there because they have to be able to live and adapt to that harsh environment, right? No plants are going to be able to live down there because there's no sun. And the animals that live down there have to be adapted to live in the cold and with a lot of pressure sitting on them. So let's talk about the animal adaptations. What do the animals do in order to live? So in the sunlight zone, you have the animals that have average eyes. They have an average mouth. They're able to swim. You also have your floaters up there. We call that plankton because in order for an animal to float, right, it has to be at the top. Then below that you have the twilight zone. The twilight zone is where you find a lot of the animals that have very big eyes because there's very little light. So they have to have big eyes to be able to see what they're eating. And the sunlight zone has very bright colored fish. The twilight zone does not have very bright colored fish. The deeper that you go, the less colors those fish have, the less vibrant or beautiful they are to look at. And that is also because the deeper that you go, they're camouflaging. So they want to look like the water that's around them. So they want to look kind of darker colored so that they blend in and they don't get eaten. Last at the bottom, you have the animals in the midnight zone. They're usually longer or they have a hard shell. And that's because there's a lot of pressure sitting on top of them. It's really hard for an animal to survive in the midnight zone. So when their animal is kind of soft or flexible or they have a shell, it allows them to survive a little bit better. They often produce their own light. So think about that angler fish that has the little floating light. And that is to lure in fish. And the colors of the fish look like their environment. So they're often gray or colorless because you can't see them anyway. There is no light. So they're blending into their environment. So those are the zones of the ocean.